Hello again everybody. So I'm in the garage doing some work on the scooter. Got the transmission apart because I'm currently in the middle of tuning the variator roller weights because these are currently incorrect for reasons which I shall explain momentarily. But I thought I'd take the opportunity to explain exactly how roller weights work in automatic variator transmissions, because a lot of people out there have the idea that heavier rollers give you a higher top speed and lighter rollers give you better acceleration. There is a degree of truth to this, but it's not exactly like that. So first things first, very quickly, the variator, as you're riding along, these rollers obviously travel up these ramps, which pushes out this plate here, which then pushes the variator out. And as it does so, the belt travels up the variator and changes the effective ratio, kind of like changing gear on a manual bike. Now then, what these little guys do is basically dictate the rate at which this changes up gear. So how this works, automatic transmissions, or scooter transmissions specifically, they allow the engine to rev up to a set RPM and then hold it at that RPM whilst the gear ratio basically changes around the engine, which is quite good in a way, because it means that on a scooter, once you've got up to the peak power, you're effectively held at peak power the whole time as it's variating, and then once it gets into the kind of top ratio, any speed you gain after that is just through increase in RPM. So these little guys dictate that RPM. Now, when we're tuning a variator, what we're effectively doing is trying to get the transmission to hold the engine in an RPM which is ideal. So, for example, out of the factory, my scooter's peak power, peak RPM, was probably something in the region of about 7,500. Now I've changed the exhaust on this one. It's actually producing peak power at a higher RPM now, something in the region of about 9,500. So because the RPM at which my peak power is being produced has changed, I need to change the roller weights so that the transmission allows the engine to get up to that peak RPM. If I install weights that are too heavy, it's going to basically change up gear too quickly. The equivalent of changing from like third to fourth on a manual bike without revving the engine out too much. Because you're changing up gear a bit too soon, the engine's going to struggle a bit because it's not getting into its peak RPM. Similarly, if I install weights that are too light, it's going to basically rev its nuts off, but not really be changing up fast enough. And again, I'm going to be revving beyond the peak power. So if my peak power is at 9,500 RPM and I'm revving at 10,000, I'm not really gaining anything from that because we've gone past the peak power. So yeah, the idea is we want this to be holding the engine at peak power. Now, regarding that misconception of top speed, installing heavier weights is not going to give you a higher top speed, simply because the belt can only travel so far up the variator. Once it gets to that point, you're in top gear, and the only way you can increase your speed is by increasing your RPM. There is another way. If I come down here quickly, you'll notice that we've got the clutch, which is not directly attached to the back wheel. It's attached to a gear, which is your primary gear, and then there's a secondary gear in here. This is like a little gearbox, and then that's attached to the wheel. So the gears inside here, if you change the ratio of them, so you can change the gears out for ones with a different ratio, that will change your effective top speed, but changing variator rollers won't. So if you have put heavier rollers in your variator and found that it's giving you more top speed, the reason is not because you've gained any top speed, it's actually because you have got back the speed you lost from having rollers that are too light. Because if the rollers are too light, as I say, it's going to rev its nuts off and not really go anywhere anyway. But also, if the rollers are too light, they might not have the weight to push this plate all the way out. So that, again, could be the reason for that. But yeah, so just to clarify, it's not that you're gaining top speed, it's just you're getting it back. Equally, if you go to a lighter set of rollers, depending on how much heavier or lighter you go, you're not necessarily going to lose acceleration or lose top speed. Obviously, lighter rollers are going to make it rev a bit more before it changes up to the next ratio, which might improve your acceleration as long as you don't go too much lighter. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose top speed. If you get it right, you actually get a perfect balance of maximum top speed and maximum acceleration. It's not about tuning for acceleration or top speed, it's about tuning to get the engine sitting at the correct RPM as it's variating. So hopefully that made sense, and you guys found that useful. If you did, please do like this video. If you want to see more stuff on motorcycles and scooters and things like that, do check out my other videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you again soon.